core of the Brehon is the femininity of the land and its
Makes sense.
connectedness of the people who live on the land here and who have been living here for 30,000 years. So Brehon itself must have been as old as the people who built Newgrange, and that was built in 3500 BC. So, if you're saying the monks came here in the year 500 and they wrote down something based on what the people were actually doing, even them writing it down was 1500 years ago. And when it was written down by Christian monks, they interspersed the Bible with it. And so it became um, encrusted with Christian ideas.
Makes sense.
So the core of the Brehon is that it was formed out of Druidry. So these were the Druids who held space in the forests on behalf of the Tuatha. And the Tuatha were small groups of family members, clan, tribes, Finne, and Tua. And then when a group of Tua were together, they essentially were maybe between 300 and 500 people who lived and ate together. And there were about 50 main Brehon schools holding all the Tua together. So each of the Brehon had a custom code for what was going on in their area. And every year they would convene at festivals in order to update what was going on local to be a national, even though it wasn't held by any idea that were centralized. Everybody had their own dialect, everybody had their own processes. The primary process for a Brehon was to resolve a dispute between two lawful beings. That was it. So if Lynn has a dispute with Michelle, you can choose your Brehon because the Brehon had a reputation for dealing fairly justly and honestly, and they wore a torque. And the mythology was if the Brehon gave a false judgment, the Brehon would be choked by the torque. On top of that, if the Brehon made a false judgment, the Brehon would be fined.
Right.
So, if you're talking about regeneration of justice or restorative justice, there
Restitution.
was
Yeah.
no need for police, there was no need for prisons and jails, because it was between Michelle and Lynn, and if it was found in favor of Lynn, Michelle, on her honor and her honor price, was bound by custom to restore the way it was before the harm was done. So common law called it tort, okay?
Mm.
But it was in place long before the common law even understood what it was. So if it was found that Lynn was found to have harmed Michelle, she would pay her honor price. But if Michelle was a shepherd, her honor price might be the wool of from her sheep. But if Michelle was the queen, her honor price would be 15 cattle.
Hmm.
So everybody in the Tua had an honor price based on their contribution to the tribe. So Log Enoch literally means the price of your face. So value was from being, not from doing. It was value was based on contribution.
I have a question, Paul, just to go
Every
back. The Brehon as a role, I, you can wait until later, but I'm interested in that role of Brehon. Was that part of the bardic? Was that person probably a member of the druid group? Yeah,
So a Brehon was a lawful being that was part of a Brehon school. And there were several Brehon schools, the O'Donnells, the O'Connors, the O'Hogans, and each of the schools were in a particular location. And it took you about 20 years to become a Brehon
yeah,
because you needed to know local custom, you needed to be able to recite poetry, you needed to understand nature, you needed to be a philosopher, you needed to hold right judgment, you had to have a reputation. And you had to be part of the community such that you're present in the daily activity of the community, so that when the Brehon came to make a judgment between Lynn and Michelle, it wasn't based on case law or precedent. It would be because the Brehon would know what was going on. He'd know
yeah,
who was stealing sheep, and he would know what the king was up to, and he would know who we were battling with, and would know the nature of the harm.
yeah,
Now, if the person who was fined didn't pay their family had to pay the fine, the
yeah.
kin. So this kept the kin in linkage with the person who was the so-called harmer. And one of the practices was that if the person who was supposed to pay the fine didn't do so, that Lynn, if she was the other part of the party, she could go and hunger strike at the door of the person who owned the
Wow,
fine. Where the shame come? Shame was not from the Brehon. The shame was from not paying the fine after it was agreed, because that was in the power of the person who won the award,
wow,
not in the Brehon, not in the community. So every individual was powerful enough that they could sit outside somebody's door, and that person, if they ate while the person was outside the door, their fine was doubled.
wow.
So you can see that the nature of not only getting into restoration, but then who pays the fine? Who owes the fine? If the fine is not paid, that the person who ought to receive the fine has the power of satire and shame, because there was no police, and the king was not the holder of justice. The holder of justice was the person who was being unjustly treated. That is that regenerative.
Paul, was the only domain really about disputes? Was it really like that law? Is it only applied to disagreements or was it broader?
So the Brehon was only called on where there was a dispute, yes. Otherwise, everybody practiced their traditions because they knew what were the agreements and the judgments made by the Brehon. So everybody operated in the full knowledge of the law. Now, in 1541, John Davis, who was the English Attorney General, wrote, "There is not a group of people in the world who value and love their law so much, even if it is against them." So everybody adored the law because that's the way the community organized themselves. And the Brehons were brought in when somebody felt that they were being misrepresented and they needed a Brehon's judgment. So justice was triangulated.
You asked, you asked, is that regenerative? And I would say, from the standpoint of the principle of feedback loops, of like, you are going to get direct feedback from actions, I would say, yeah, that meets that feedback loop, that principle really strongly. And that's not, so that's one thing. And one of the things that's important to me about understanding and beginning to practice regenerative governance as we try to make a transition in our lives, in our culture, in our world, is that so much in general, particularly in the Western world, we've lost it. Like there's a multi generational chasm between any indigenous traditions that we had, any of the customs or agreements or practices for creating customs, for creating agreements. So you say there's, this is many generations of lore and law that people are just steeped in. They just grow up in it, and you know it. You have a bardic oral tradition, so lots of people, whether they are actually a formal bard or not, I imagine many people can recite and say what the law is. It's not it's not like you don't have to have a you have to have a special training to be a Brehon, but you don't have to have a special training to understand the agreements and laws of your clan and of your tribe, your clan, the nation. I imagine because it's just your life. You're just living in that life, and we know, and it comes down through story. And so the reason we want to try to sort of piece something together that works now is because so much of it's gone, and having access to these traditions and what you are doing over there, Paul, is I'm so inspired and thrilled to know about it. I want to actually come and study it. So, well, that a little dream. I see a hand from Rick.
No, Paul, I'd like you to maybe elaborate a little bit more on what you were talking about in dealing with disputes, because what I'm hearing from you, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it's a very sophisticated system of accountability that can be relatively real time and can make amends for wrongdoings and harms that are done. But I wanted to maybe just step back from where it gets to disputes, where it has to do with healthy frictions and disagreements within a community. Because if they're not handled well, they can end up in disputes that cause harm. So I was wondering if you could elaborate on how this indigenous way of living helps to mediate against, or at least enabling people to work through healthy frictions and disagreements so that there's less disputes. You get my drift, Paul?
Um, can I do a screen share? I just want to show you
Please.
a short document. Okay, can you see that document?
Yep.
Okay, so this is my own document, okay? What I did was I took 50 Brehon texts and then I used AI to look at each individual entry, see how many themes there were, and look at the major subject areas, okay? So what wasn't covered in the original slides were social structure and rank, the grades, the kin groups, the dependent status, the honor and the reputation, fines and reputation. And I know you're asking me to look at that, but this is a tiny part of it. Okay, satire and defamation, distress, surety, assembly, fasting, contract, treaties, family law, fosterage, women's status, learned orders, poetic grades, legal texts, hospitality and care, stick maintenance, land, trees, bees, water, kingship, sacred law, what the church baked in, how we protected ourselves.
Wow.
That's Brehon law.
Fantastic.
Oh my goodness, Paul. I think you need to come back and do a presentation for us, don't you think?
If
This
you
is
had
fan-
time, it would be such a
oh, it would
gift.
be wonderful, like just to kind of get a
So,
shape of what you're talking about in our
so
thinking.
just to come back to your question, Rick, if the ultimate aim of Brehon law was to reduce the number of disputes, it has failed miserably. Okay? Why? Because right now, in little old Ireland, with our 7 million people, okay, The church system came in, the capitalist system came in. Okay, we've had seven invasions. The Vikings, the English, the Tudors, not only King Henry, but King Henry's two daughters. Okay, all of them. The International Monetary Fund was here, gave us 80 billion euros and cut us all by the balls. And it's a complete
Yeah.
mess. Everybody's in dispute all the time.
Yeah,
Okay, we're in dispute on the road.
what was I referring to, not what's happened since, but when it was operational and a living, a way of living, I could see how that sort of systemic structure would actually enable people to have less disputes. Now, talking about external interference, increasing disputes is a completely different. And what I'm hearing, though, is that it's a method of not only community harmony, but harmony with nature as well.
Yeah. 100%. Um, we're looking good. Nikki's got her hand up. Paul, is there a place where we can follow up and see what you're working on and where folks can follow you and read your work or have access to this document or the book or anything that you're doing? I know I would love it.
With pleasure. Very happy to share what we're
Great.
doing. So please reach out afterwards. We are setting up Brehon schools here in small, real physical communities. And we're helping those groups to remember who they were so that they can adopt what's relevant from the Brehon canon into their daily lives and to be fully in tune with the state, with the capitalists,
Right.
with the technologists, so that we are essentially creating a combined feathered approach for the next seven generations. So I've put that document into
Thank
the
you.
chat, but do feel free to reach out. Yes, please, yeah, feel free.
Yeah, along the same lines, Paul, I'm just really thrilled that we have the prospect of potentially moving beyond colonial retribution and towards decentralized restitution. It sounds like a much
Right.
better approach. Thank you for that intro.
Well, I really
Um,
like the idea of opening up the question of more knowing more about indigenous governance because I feel like we both kind of utopianize it and trivialize it all the time, you know? It's like we kind of indigenous wisdom and we throw it off, but I don't really feel like I know much about it. And so I don't know, the things about how the folks that were responsible for the US, Bill of Rights and things like, like
yeah.
really, I don't know how'd that work. I mean, I'd love to know more. So.
Yeah.
Just following up on that here, David, I think what I liked about this, what you described, is kind of the axiomatic, low tech, not overbuilt kind of approach. So yes, we need that. So thank you.